Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from. I want to tell you something I have never said out loud to anyone except my attorney and my youngest daughter. Not because I'm ashamed, I'm not, but because for a long time, I wasn't sure the world deserved to hear it. Now I think maybe it does. My name is Margaret. I'm 64 years old. I live in Savannah, Georgia, and for 35 years I was the kind of wife that other women pointed to when they talked about what a good marriage looked like. I hosted holiday dinners for 22 people. I drove 4 hours each way, twice a month, to care for my mother-in-law when her memory started to go. I built a life the way you build a house, brick by brick, room by room, making sure every corner was steady before I moved on to the next. I was proud of that life. I was proud of us. And then one Thursday afternoon in March, I found out that the man I had built it with had been quietly burning it down for the past 2 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really begins, which is not the Thursday I found out. It's the Saturday, 6 weeks earlier, at my husband's retirement party, when he stood at the front of the room, looked out at everyone who loved him, and said the most beautiful things about me that I have ever heard. He said I was the reason for every good thing in his life. He said he could not have done any of it, the career, the reputation, the man he had become without me standing beside him. He raised his glass and he looked right at me, and there were tears in his eyes, and he said, "To Margaret, my compass, my constant, my 35 years." Everyone in that room stood up. 112 people, standing and applauding, looking at me with warmth and admiration. And right there in the middle of the room, at the round table nearest the window, the one with the white hydrangeas in the centerpiece table, for I saw her stand up too. She was clapping the loudest of anyone. I smiled at her. I had known her for 11 years. She was my neighbor. She had a key to my house for emergencies. I had driven her to her chemotherapy appointments 3 years ago when her husband was traveling for work. I had held her hand in that waiting room and brought her soup when she was too weak to cook. She stood at table 4 and she clapped for me and she smiled at my husband and he nodded at her, and I thought nothing of it. I thought nothing of it because I trusted him completely. 35 years will do that to you? 35 years and you stop looking for the thing that isn't there, because why would you? You've earned the right to stop looking. That was my mistake, I suppose. Not trusting him. I will never regret trusting him. But my mistake was thinking that trust was a two-way door. I found out on a Thursday, like I said. He was upstairs getting ready for dinner, and his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to look at it. I was reaching past it to get a dish towel. But the screen lit up, and the name was right there, and the first 4 words of the message were right there, and those 4 words were enough to stop the air in my lungs. Can't stop thinking about. That was all I saw before the screen went dark again. I stood at that kitchen counter for a long time. The dish towel was in my hand. I could hear him moving around upstairs, the familiar sound of his footsteps on the hardwood, the creak of the closet door. Every sound I had listened to for 35 years, as comfortable and ordinary as rainfall. I put the dish towel down very carefully. I did not pick up his phone. I did not go upstairs. I did not say a word at dinner, because dinner happened the way it always happened. And he talked about a golf trip with his brother, and I passed the bread, and I smiled at the right moments, and the whole time something cold and very quiet was settling into my chest, like a stone finding the bottom of a lake. I need you to understand something about the woman I am. I am not impulsive. I grew up in a household where my father said, and he said it often, that you do not make the most important decisions of your life when you are the most upset about them. You wait. You think. You make sure you know exactly what you're holding before you decide what to do with it. So I waited. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay in the dark beside him, and I made a list in my mind of everything I needed to know before I did anything at all. I wasn't cold. I wasn't calculating. I was in more pain than I had ever been in my life. But I had learned, somewhere in 64 years of living, that pain is loudest in the first hours, and that what you do after those first hours is what defines you. Over the next 2 weeks, I found out everything. I am not going to walk you through every detail of how I did it, because honestly, some of it still makes me feel a kind of grief I don't have a name for. But I will tell you that it had been going on for just over 2 years. I will tell you that it had started the summer my husband retired from his firm, when he suddenly had more time and less purpose, and she was right next door with her warm smile and her easy availability. I will tell you that they had been careful, but not careful enough, because careful people do not leave a paper trail, and he had always been better at managing people than managing details. 2 years. While I was bringing her soup during her chemotherapy, she was in my husband's car. While I was planning his retirement party, choosing the flowers and the venue and the caterer, and writing the toast, I never actually delivered because he insisted on speaking first. She was sending him messages. While he was standing in front of 112 people calling me his compass, his constant, his 35 years he had seen her 2 days before and would see her again 4 days after. I sat with all of this for a long time. I cried exactly twice, once in the parking lot of the grocery store, where I sat in my car for 40 minutes before I trusted myself to drive home, and once in the shower at 5 in the morning when the house was still dark and quiet. Those were my 2 moments. I allowed myself those 2 moments, and then I put them away, because I had something to plan. Here is what I knew. My husband and I had a 35th anniversary coming up in 8 weeks. We had already booked the venue, a restaurant on the river that we had loved for years. We had already sent invitations to 40 people. The reservation was in my name. Everything was in my name. I called our attorney mine, specifically, not the one we shared for estate planning, and I spent 2 hours in her office on a Tuesday morning while my husband thought I was at my book club. I want to be honest with you. I did not go into that meeting wanting to blow anything up. I went in wanting to understand my options. But by the time I walked out 2 hours later, I understood something that I had not understood when I walked in. I had spent 35 years making myself smaller so that his life could be bigger. I had turned down a job offer in 1998 because it would have required us to move, and he didn't want to leave Georgia. I had deferred and adjusted and accommodated 1,000 small times because I loved him, and because I believed he deserved it, and because I thought we were building something together. And he had taken all of that, all 35 years of it, and he had treated it like it was nothing. I went home that afternoon and I sat in the garden and I looked at the house we had lived in for 27 years, and I made my decision. The anniversary dinner would go forward exactly as planned. I just made a few small changes to the guest list. Over the next 6 weeks, I was the most serene version of myself I have ever been. My daughters will tell you, both of them, that they noticed something different about me during that time, a kind of stillness, a calm that didn't quite match the occasion. My older daughter asked me twice if I was feeling all right. I told her I was fine. I told her I was just reflective, thinking about 35 years, thinking about everything behind us and everything still ahead. She accepted that. She didn't push. I did not tell my daughters what I knew. Not yet. I needed to do this one thing first, and then I would tell them everything, and we would figure out the rest together. But I needed to do this one thing in the way I had chosen to do it, and I needed to do it alone. The dinner was on a Saturday in late May. The weather had been uncertain all week, that particular Georgia unpredictability, where you genuinely cannot tell if you'll get sunshine or a thunderstorm. But that Saturday morning, the sky was clear and very blue, and I drove to the salon and had my hair done, and I wore the navy dress I had bought specifically for that evening, and I put on the pearl earrings my mother had given me when I turned 50, and I looked at myself in the mirror before I left the house, and I thought, "You are ready." My husband thought I looked beautiful. He said so in the car on the way there. He held my hand across the console the way he always had, and he talked about how strange it was to think about 35 years, how fast it had gone, how grateful he was. He said it with complete sincerity. That is the part that I think about sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of sad bewilderment. He meant every word. He was capable of meaning every word and still doing what he had done. I don't fully understand that. I don't think I ever will. The restaurant was lovely. We had reserved the private dining room on the upper level with the long windows overlooking the river. 40 guests, round tables with white linens, candles, everything exactly the way we had planned it. There were 5 tables. She was at table 4 again. I had placed her there deliberately for reasons that will become clear. Her husband was at table 4 as well, seated to her left. He is a quiet man, a civil engineer, someone I had always liked. He deserved to know the truth. That was one of the reasons I had called him 3 days earlier and invited him personally. I told him I was reorganizing the seating and wanted to make sure he could come. He said, of course, he wouldn't miss it. He had no idea. I had also made sure that my attorney was in the room. Not in a dramatic way, she is genuinely a friend. She had been on the original guest list, and she was simply there. But I had spoken to her the week before and told her everything, and she was there. Dinner moved the way these things move. Cocktail hour, people settling in, the particular warmth of a room full of people who have known each other for years. I watched my husband work the room. He has always been good at that. Easy and charming, moving from conversation to conversation with his hand on someone's shoulder, that laugh of his that makes everyone feel like they're the most interesting person in the room. I watched him and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not anger, not even sadness, but a kind of clarity. The fog of 35 years of assumptions had lifted, and I was simply seeing him. Just him. For the first time in a very long time. After the main course, he stood up to speak. I had heard him give speeches before. He is good at them. He built his whole career on knowing how to walk into a room and say exactly the right thing to exactly the right people. So I was not surprised when the room went quiet quickly, when the attention gathered around him the way attention always did. He talked about our life. He was warm and specific and generous, the way a man is when he has rehearsed something and knows it lands well. He talked about the early years, our first apartment, the daughters, the house. He talked about the career and how I had been the stable ground beneath all of it. He said that whatever he had accomplished, the real achievement of his life was 35 years with a woman of remarkable grace and character. He said, "She has never asked for more than I could give, and she has always given more than I deserved." And that, I thought, is the truest thing you will say all evening. The room was warm. People were smiling. A few of the women at the near tables had that soft, tearful look that comes when something is genuinely touching. My husband raised his glass and looked at me, and I looked back at him, and I smiled. And then I stood up. There was a small ripple of pleasant surprise. People assumed I was going to respond in kind, to give my own speech, which would have been the natural thing. My husband smiled and made a small gesture, inviting me, gracious. I said, "Thank you, sweetheart. 35 years is a long time, long enough to know someone completely, long enough to know everything about a person, who they are when things are easy, and who they are when they think no one is watching." The room was still warm, still smiling. I turned slightly, toward table 4. I said, "I also want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has been a very significant presence in our lives these past 2 years. Someone who has spent a great deal of time with my husband. Someone who knows him, I think, in ways that are quite intimate." The smile on her face changed. It happened slowly, the way ice cracks, one line and then another. I said, "Her husband is here tonight as well. I made sure of that. I thought he deserved to be in the room for this." The quiet that fell was the particular quiet of 40 people suddenly understanding that something real is happening. Not performance, not a toast, something real. I looked at her husband and I said his name, gently, and I said, "I'm so sorry. You are a good man, and you deserved better than what has been happening in your home. I have some documents for you that I think you'll need. My attorney will make sure you have everything." He looked at me. Then he looked at his wife. And I watched 35 years of assumptions lift from his face the same way they had lifted from mine. I turned back to the room. I said, "To everyone here tonight, thank you for 35 years of friendship and love. I hope you'll continue to show that love to my daughters in the months ahead, because they're going to need it. As for me, I am going to be just fine." I picked up my glass. I said, "I have been graceful for 35 years. I have been patient and accommodating and quiet. Tonight I am choosing to be something else. Tonight I am choosing to be honest. I drank, and then I set my glass down, I picked up my purse, and I walked out of that room. My older daughter met me in the hallway. I had told her 30 minutes before dinner that I needed her to be in the hallway at that moment, without telling her why. She had trusted me enough to be there. When she saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just took my arm, and we walked down the stairs and out into the May evening and stood on the sidewalk by the river, and the air smelled like salt and magnolia, and I took the deepest breath I had taken in 2 years. She said, "Mom, what just happened?" I said, "The truth happened. Finally." She held my arm tighter, and we stood there watching the river for a while, and I let myself feel it, all of it, the grief and the anger and the strange, enormous relief of having done the thing I had decided to do in exactly the way I had decided to do it. No screaming, no begging, no scene that would make anyone uncomfortable for my sake. Just the truth, delivered clearly, in a room full of witnesses, on my own terms. He called my phone 4 times that night. I didn't answer. He came to the house 3 days later. I had already had the locks changed, my attorney had advised this, and she was right, and I will be honest with you, turning that new key in the lock for the first time was one of the most quietly powerful feelings I have ever had. He rang the doorbell. I could see him on the security camera I had installed the week before. I watched him stand on the porch for 12 minutes. Then he left. What followed was not simple. I want to be honest about that, because I don't think it serves anyone to make this sound like a clean story with a clean ending. Divorce is not clean. 35 years of shared finances and shared property and shared memories do not untangle quickly or without pain. There were hard conversations and harder silences, and there were nights, more than I want to admit, when I sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m. and felt the weight of it. But here is what I also felt, mixed in with all of that. Myself. For the first time in a very long time, clearly and without interference, I felt myself. I found out, at 64, that I love early mornings more than I had ever been able to enjoy them, because he had always slept late, and I had always tried to be quiet. I found out that I can cook whatever I want for dinner without negotiating with anyone's preferences. I found out that I can have a glass of wine on the porch by myself on a Wednesday evening and watch the light change over the garden and feel something that I can only describe as peace. I signed up for a pottery class in the fall. I had always been curious about it and had never made the time. The instructor is a young woman in her 30s who has the kind of focused energy I find deeply admirable, and I am not particularly talented, and it does not matter at all. I go every Tuesday evening and I make imperfect things out of clay, and I come home with my hands a little stiff and my mind completely quiet. My younger daughter flew in from Portland in September and spent 2 weeks with me, and we went to the farmer's market every Saturday morning and cooked elaborate dinners and talked for hours, the kind of talking we had not been able to do when I was busy being the person everyone needed me to be. She told me, one night over dinner, that she had been worried about me for years, not about anything specific, but about a kind of dimness she had noticed, a sense that I was always slightly in the background of my own life. She said she hadn't known how to say it, and she was glad she didn't have to say it anymore. I thought about that for a long time after she said it. A kind of dimness. In the background of my own life, I had not seen it while I was living it. That is the thing about the choices you make slowly. The 1,000 small accommodations, you don't experience them as loss at the time. You experience them as love, as reasonable compromise, as the ordinary texture of a shared life. It is only afterward, when the life is suddenly and completely your own again, that you can see the shape of what you were holding and understand how heavy it was. I am not angry at him anymore. I want to be clear about that because I think sometimes people expect the story to end with anger, and mine doesn't. What he did was a betrayal of everything I believed about us, and it caused me more pain than I have words for, and I will never pretend otherwise. But anger requires energy, and I have better uses for mine now. I am also not angry at her, though that one took longer to get to. She made her own choices, and she will live with them. Her husband filed for divorce 2 weeks after our dinner. He has been kind to me in the way that people are kind to each other when they have survived the same storm, and I am grateful for that unexpected small connection. What I feel, mostly, is awake. Awake and interested and curious about what comes next in a way that I had forgotten was possible. Every day I have the whole day, and it belongs only to me, and I get to decide what to do with it. If that sounds simple, I promise you it is the most extraordinary thing I have ever experienced. Someone asked me recently, a woman at my pottery class, who had been going through her own difficult year, whether I had any regrets, whether I wished I had done something differently, whether I wished I had confronted him privately, or left quietly, or handled it in some way that made fewer waves. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said, I don't regret what I did. I was dignified for 35 years. I was faithful and present and steady, and I did everything I said I would do when I made those promises. I kept my side of it completely. And when I found out that he had not, I chose to be honest about it in a room full of people who deserved the truth, and I walked out with my head up, and I have never once wished I had done it differently. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "That sounds like freedom." And I said, "Yes, that is exactly what it sounds like." That's my story. I'm still writing the rest of it. One Tuesday pottery class, and one Saturday farmer's market, and one quiet Wednesday evening at a time, and I have to tell you, it is turning out to be a very good one. If this story moved you or meant something to you, I'd love for you to leave a comment below. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to choose yourself, please share this with them. I'll be back soon with another story. Thank you for watching.